I make a lot of videos about Squirrelflight. I adore her. I won't deny that she is one of my favorite characters. I've got that written right on my channel. I've made tons of short videos where she's featured. I made a video about what color she was, and to save you the effort of going back to 2016, the answer was red. Squirrelflight is red, Dark Ginger means red, and Alderheart is red too. And Squirrelflight just generally ends up being the cat I draw the most. Squirrelflight, however, has never been a fully popular character. While characters like Hollyleaf only had a few sparse haters like me, a massive Ashfur fan in the year 2009, and characters like Dovewing are probably hated by more people than who like them, Squirrelflight has a pretty even split. When talking about warrior cats, do you ever hear somebody say Squirrelflight and Brambleclaw are equally bad to each other? I do constantly. There's this idea that their relationship either does or doesn't work because both of them are aggressive or toxic towards each other. This is a compromise. Brambleclaw's actions are loud and undeniable. To be okay with the way he treats Squirrelflight, you need to find some reason to justify it. By using vague terminology like, they're both pushing each other's buttons, or they're both bad for each other, you can push aside any idea that one of them may be way worse to the other. Now, alongside this, something people frequently do is insinuate that Squirrelflight being an innocent party is an invention of the fandom, or strictly regulated to whatever aspect of the community they dislike, such as the Warrior Cats Wiki, Tumblr, or Twitter. I would like to propose that when you actually look at the books themselves, this couldn't be any more wrong. In fact, Squirrelflight being just as bad as Brambleclaw is much greater an invention of the fandom than her being an innocent party. Squirrelflight is often blamed for instigating Brambleclaw's actions towards her, either because she's too independent, annoying, or because she hid the secret of her children's parentage from him. I'll get to that last one later, but we should consider that a chunk of Brambleclaw's terrible behavior towards Squirrelflight actually happens specifically within the new prophecy before that event even takes place. I'll discard the other points as well for now. Squirrelflight being annoying is a matter of opinion, but being annoying is never an excuse to treat someone badly. Likewise, Squirrelflight acting against Brambleclaw's wishes as leader in books like Bramblestar's Storm and Squirrelflight's Hope shouldn't be taken in a different light or context than Fireheart's actions behind Bluestar's back in the original series. I should clarify that in Bramblestar's Storm, she isn't acting against his wishes, she's just kind of being loud. Especially in Squirrelflight's Hope, which I will go over in lots of detail later, holding Squirrelflight to a standard where she would have to be submissive in the face of both cruelty to the sisters and incompetence towards the other clans is just wrong. And something that happens rather abruptly when a conversation changes to the morality of Squirrelflight is a switch between using our morals as a reader to using the morals of the cats in-universe. As readers, we are supposed to take the political actions of cats like Squirrelflight and her father Fireheart as examples of necessary rule-breaking in order to do what's right. In the Warrior Cats universe, even though Squirrelflight is acting in the interest of both SkyClan's well-being and in the protection of the sisters' children, she is breaking an important rule, that the leader's word is law. Granted, this is a rule that we as a fandom largely understand to be, well, frustrating. In addition to that, it has been manipulated by multiple leaders in bad faith in the past, especially seriously in the current arc where Bramblestar is possessed. Squirrelflight disobeyed her leader, sure, but it wasn't wrong of her to do so. She was completely correct to do what she did, especially by her own morality. If or not she breaks a rule in the process is not worth more than the lives of others. You cannot say that Squirrelflight and Brambleclaw are equally bad when Squirrelflight is disobeying out of purely good conscience and moral obligation. This is also seeing things on a level of black and white, considering all wrongs to be equally wrong. To say, oh, Bramblestar is wrong, but Squirrelflight also disobeyed him to do the right thing, just doesn't feel right to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll get to Squirrelflight's Hope later. Let's start at the beginning, and by the beginning I mean the beginning of their relationship, because Bramblestar and Squirrelflight have always had a bad relationship. It didn't start good and get worse. It didn't have any sort of inconsistency even. It follows a pattern. I believe, completely, that Bramblestar is abusive and Squirrelflight is a victim. I should clarify that neither Brambleclaw is abusive, nor they both were bad for each other is the intention of the author. What is the intention of the author? Heck if I know. In Squirrelflight's Hope, Brambleclaw is clearly and definitely supposed to be in the wrong, but in every other instance of their relationship, it's strange. Like, clearly Brambleclaw is incorrect in multiple occasions, but on these occasions he's the protagonist, and the intention is probably to sympathize with him, and if they realized how awful this entire situation is, I'd imagine they'd never be keeping them together, or at least they'd be writing it differently. Let's begin with a bit of a tongue twister. At the very start of Starlight, Squirrelpaw becomes Squirrelflight. Around this time, she becomes close with Brambleclaw without either of them formally using the word mate, but her sister Leafpool is already acknowledging them as such. Immediately, something comes up. Squirrelflight doesn't trust Hawkfrost. Hawkfrost is Brambleclaw's brother. Squirrelflight believes that Hawkfrost is overly ambitious and trying to get rid of a cat named Mistyfoot, who is currently the deputy of RiverClan. This is correct. She also knows from her sister Leafpool's experience with him that he's bad news. Brambleclaw disregards both of these pretty valid problems and jumps to the conclusion that Squirrelflight hates Hawkfrost based on his parentage, an idea that Squirrelflight immediately denies by saying, "If that's what you think, then you don't know me at all." He ignores the fact that she's denied it, and believes the made-up narrative in his head instead of the actual reasons presented by his almost mate. Having inherited evil from Tigerstar is something that Brambleclaw worries about all book, and he's projecting this insecurity on Squirrelflight, who doesn't so much as imply it. He continues being angry that he's on bad terms with her for a while, and then he starts training in hell and meeting his dead evil father there. You know, the guy he's upset with Squirrelflight for associating his family with, something she isn't even doing. Squirrelflight tries to patch it up, but he's so insecure about having a dream where he meets Tigerstar that he pushes her away again. Squirrelflight then confronts him about Hawkfrost, who Brambleclaw now knows is ambitious and is met with Tigerstar, and when he again criticizes her for distrusting and being rude to Hawkfrost, she breaks up with him. She says Hawkfrost is more important than she is and walks off. Brambleclaw believes that no, Squirrelflight is the most important thing to him. At this point in their relationship, he has already proven that he cannot listen to her or take her concerns seriously. Additionally, he has blatantly chosen to keep his Tigerstar dream from her. Through his actions, Brambleclaw has basically proven to both the reader and Squirrelflight that she isn't important to him. If he cannot trust Squirrelflight and she cannot trust him, there is no good reason for them to be together. This is when a third character in the new prophecy's Squirrelflight romance arc comes into the picture, a former complete background character named Ashfur. Before this point, Ashfur was not a person. Squirrelflight has begun hanging out with Ashfur, along with Thornclaw and Spiderleg, some sort of stubborn cat clique within ThunderClan. Ashfur seems to like Squirrelflight. The authors don't humor us with Ashfur very much during this book. His eyes twinkle a little bit while looking at her, but we never really get to see how she feels about him. Then, at the climax of Starlight, Mudclaw admits that he worked with Hawkfrost to plot a coup. Brambleclaw chooses not to believe this. Squirrelflight doesn't. Then, when Twilight starts, Brambleclaw and Squirrelflight are still broken up. Brambleclaw is being hostile towards her, and both of them fight. She again insists this isn't about parentage, and instead about her being convinced Hawkfrost is evil. At this point, as readers, we know she's right, and we know there's more than enough evidence for both her and Brambleclaw to understand this. After they fight, she thinks well of Ashfur, who is, in her opinion, gentler towards her than Brambleclaw. From this point on, Brambleclaw starts being patronizing towards both Squirrelflight and Ashfur, making them agitated. He takes every opportunity he can to put down Squirrelflight or be passive-aggressive. She responds with actual aggression and fights with him. He goes out of his way to insult both of them whenever he can and jumps on opportunities to punish Squirrelflight. Of course, this also makes Squirrelflight angry. She runs away after a scolding session over her playing moss ball with Ashfur and runs into a fox. The three of them fight off the fox, and Brambleclaw scolds her again. And again. When it comes to the new prophecy specifically, I've had people complain that because Squirrelflight reacts aggressively to Brambleclaw's behavior that they're equally terrible. This sort of thing unsettles me because it implies that if Brambleclaw is acting unfairly towards her, she should just let him do it. Of course she's reacting. He's repeatedly punishing her for a misunderstanding that she has tried multiple times at this point to clear up. Alternatively, he's punishing her because she's hanging out with another guy, which doesn't give me red flags at all. Squirrelflight also accidentally crosses into ShadowClan, which makes Brambleclaw start up all over again, only for Ashfur to defend her from him. She tells Brambleclaw that she trusts Ashfur, not him, and he insults her again, implying she's, somebody who wants a mate who helps her? What? Or maybe he's trying to say she wants an easy life? Is he calling her some sort of emotional gold digger? I'm super confused by this insult specifically, honestly, and it only really goes to show that Brambleclaw's a massive jerk. Squirrelflight, you just want a cat who's supportive, and not a cat like me, who is never supportive or understanding. I thought you were better than this, but I guess I was wrong. Brambleclaw becomes increasingly controlling as the book goes on, going out of his way to order Squirrelflight around. He even becomes more aggressive towards Ashfur, who has since gotten an apprentice on top of being friends with Squirrelflight, when Brambleclaw needs one to become deputy. And it's not like it's all flowers and sunshine with Ashfur either, who reveals he has prejudice against kitty pets and protecting and babying Squirrelflight more than she'd like, but he's being kind to her. When badgers attack camp, Ashfur is overprotective and tries to fight Squirrelflight's battles for her. She's more worried about Brambleclaw than Ashfur during the fight, rather nonsensically. She, at some point during this fight, realizes she still has feelings for Brambleclaw. Brambleclaw, who has been treating her poorly and punishing her all book. Her opinion on Hawkfrost is disregarded around Chapter 19. Hawkfrost isn't even mentioned after Chapter 20. The fact that, up until this point, Brambleclaw has been treating her poorly in almost every interaction is also completely disregarded by the narrative. Oh, and did I mention that Brambleclaw has been visiting Tigerstar in his dreams all book? Just keep that in mind, it's not that relevant. Before I move on to Sunset, I want to quickly address something that causes a lot of confusion. Were Ashfur and Squirrelflight actually together? I'm giving that a hesitant yes. They were courting, as Warrior Cats doesn't really have any sort of word for an in-between state between mates and not mates. I feel like this is the best term to describe it. They weren't mates, but they were sort of on the road to becoming mates. Ashfur and Squirrelflight were more physically affectionate and emotionally dependent on each other than a normal pair of warriors would be. She leans on him, he grooms her, and they're very touchy for two warriors who would just be friends. She's not dense either. She's thinking of Ashfur romantically. There's also no implication that she's leading him on or tricking him or using her to make Brambleclaw jealous, which are all things I hear frequently. For a period of time, Squirrelflight is legitimately interested and considering Ashfur. She thinks of him romantically. She compares him to a sparkling lake and is reassured by his kindness. She just, ultimately, in a decision that I cannot empathize with, gets with a person who has been treating her like, well, crow food for the last book and a half. Yes, there were issues with Ashfur. He was minorly controlling in his own way and wanted to fight her battles for her. He was treating her like she needed him to take care of her, which she really wasn't fond of. Also, kitty pet xenophobia, she didn't need to stand for. But she didn't have a bad relationship with Ashfur when she unquestionably did with Brambleclaw. Additionally, when she chooses to become Bramblestar's mate instead, Ashfur is mentioned explicitly as someone who needs to be told. Because Warrior Cats really doesn't have much notion of it, there's no overlap between her relationship between the two Toms. She stops courting Brambleclaw, begins courting Ashfur, and then stops courting Ashfur to get together with Brambleclaw again. This is unfair to Ashfur, clearly, but it's her decision. She wasn't cheating on anybody. In the next book, Sunset, Squirrelflight and Brambleclaw actually get back together. Danger of the Badgers has made them realize how important they are to each other. Squirrelflight breaks up with Ashfur off-screen, and while this change of heart feels, honestly, like a bad decision at this point, it's her choice. Leafpool also has a vision of their relationship. StarClan literally shipping these two cats, which isn't terribly relevant as Squilf has already made up her mind about this, but definitely weird as heck. And after that, the rest of the book is Sunset, a book about nothing but tepid deputy drama and one fun scene at the end. Good night, Sunset. Before I move on to Leafpool's wish, I want to ask a question. Was Brambleclaw's treatment of Squirrelflight justified? We as readers know that Squirrelflight holds no prejudice towards Hawkfrost for his parentage. Squirrelflight also attempted to make it clear what her reasoning was. Brambleclaw was projecting and taking out his insecurities on her. But Brambleclaw never needed to admit he was wrong, and the whole thing was forgotten about and allowed to pass by. But it's the way he acts while they're estranged that bothers me the most. Not only does he push her away, but he proceeds to punish her for finding companionship in other people. He acts like he wants control over her by going out of his way to boss her around and finding any excuse to punish her while she's doing nothing to purposefully upset him, and had up until that point already tried to appease him and make up. But because the characters choose to forget about this, the books choose to forget about this. And I should make a point here that Squirrelflight is never avoiding Brambleclaw until he starts treating her poorly. She even tries to apologize and forget it much earlier than he lets it go. This is how Brambleclaw treats Squirrelflight in the absence of their power imbalance. He is less successful at controlling her than he is in the later arcs, but he still gets his way in the end. He is not responsible for what he has done, and he does not need to admit that he was wrong. Anyways, Leafpool's wish picks up, with Squirrelflight and Brambleclaw all made up. They're mates now, and they've been mates for about a moon, 4 weeks. This is the point where Leafpool tells her sister that she is pregnant, 1 single month into their relationship. Squirrelflight is annoyed with Brambleclaw, who hasn't been treating her like an equal. Can't it wait? Brambleclaw wants me to fetch soaked moss for the nursery, even though it's an apprentice task. He hasn't stopped giving me orders since Firestar made him deputy. Who does Brambleclaw think he is, treating me like I'm still wet behind my ears? Toms are so much trouble. You don't know how lucky you are, Leafpool, not having to worry about things like that. Well, I know there was Crowfeather. And sure, she could just be being immature and complaining here, as Brambleclaw is deputy now, but regardless of if she's overreacting, 3 things can be gleaned here. The first is that there's a very clear power imbalance between the two now that he's deputy. This isn't a horrible thing, but it's something to keep in mind. Second, it's been a single month and Squirrelflight is already having troubles in their relationship. And third, Squirrelflight feels patronized, which has been a reoccurring problem in their relationship from the start. And they get over this fight. They're seen together fine a day or 2 later, but this all brings up a very important thing in my mind. There is only a short period of time in Brambleclaw's entire life where he hasn't been in a direct position of power over Squirrelflight. He was already a warrior when she was born. On the journey, she was an apprentice and he was a warrior. Only a few months after making it to the Lake Territories, Brambleclaw is made deputy and continues to be in a higher position of power for what seems to be the duration of their lives. But anyways, Leafpool's wish. Leafpool wants Squirrelflight to take her kits. And I don't really need to go into too much detail here, but she doesn't want to. She specifically mentions not wanting to lie to Brambleclaw when she refuses. The second time she refuses, she says it again. She can't lie to Brambleclaw for the rest of his life. She leaves with Leafpool when she wants to go have her kits, and they're gone for nearly a whole moon. When they come back, because something Feathertail's ghost, and Squirrelflight being told that she's barren and will never have children of her own, Squirrelflight has decided to adopt them in secret, so she tells Bramblestar that they're his. Brambleclaw accepts this, just instantly. And for the duration of J-Kit, Holly-Kit, and Lion-Kit's kithood and apprenticeship, everything seems fine between them. Soon after they're made warriors, though, and I really feel like I don't even need to explain this, assuming you've all read Warrior Cats before, the secret is made public by Hollyleaf. On the spot, Brambleclaw breaks up with Squirrelflight. Why? I had to. She's my sister. And you couldn't trust me? You couldn't trust me. Don't you think I would have helped you if you'd told me the truth? But it's too late now. Brambleclaw claims he would have helped her if she had told the truth, but we have no way of knowing if that's true or not. It was unfair of Squirrelflight to hide it from him, and this is playing pretend that she would have had a choice at all when StarClan God themselves, who no other warrior cat has ever properly disobeyed on purpose ever, made her take the kits. Okay, no warrior but Pine Star. But can we trust Brambleclaw? Brambleclaw who never told Squirrelflight he was training in the Dark Forest? Brambleclaw who held a grudge over Squirrelflight having a suspicion for months? Brambleclaw who StarClan themselves seemingly wanted to keep this a secret from? Brambleclaw who she had only been together with after a huge fight for a month? Brambleclaw has every right to terminate their relationship, no question there, but I feel like that should have been the end of it. But moving on to Omen of the Stars, nearly every time Squirrelflight is mentioned, it's either because Jay or Lion is commenting on how she's not their mother, or it's because Brambleclaw is singling her out somehow. Along with a few scenes where Squirrelflight is looking at Brambleclaw like a kicked puppy. He treats her with an inordinate amount of disdain compared to other warriors and punishes her by ignoring her, avoiding her, and acting passive-aggressive. While he isn't being as openly cruel as he was when she was seeing Ashfur in the new prophecy, he clearly isn't acting properly. In Lion Blaze's perspective, in early 4th Apprentice, 6 months after the reveal, we get this passage. Since the truth came out, Brambleclaw and Squirrelflight had barely spoken to each other, and although Brambleclaw never punished Squirrelflight by giving her the hardest tasks or the most dangerous patrols, he made sure that their paths never crossed as they carried out their duties. Then, in the next book, we get this scene where Squirrelflight tries to instruct her adopted son, but Bramblestar immediately contradicts her. Stop stirring up trouble. Sometimes aggression is necessary. StarClan gave us claws for a reason. The orange she-cat's eyes flashed with shock, as though his words had raked her muzzle. Lion Blaze winced visibly. Book after that, we get a scene where Brambleclaw glares at her for, being on the same patrol as him, and she submissively backs off. And in Sign of the Moon, we get this. Brambleclaw, do you have any messages for the tribe? I could say hi to Stormfur and Brook for you. Jayfeather heard something else beneath her words, something she dared not ask for out loud. She wants Brambleclaw to wish her luck, or to tell her to be careful, anything that will show he still cares about her. But all Brambleclaw said was, "Sure, tell him they're missed in ThunderClan." Jay Feather could almost taste Squirrelflight's disappointment. Then, after the Forgotten Warrior, which, by the way, is the only Omen of the Stars book where we don't have a token scene where Brambleclaw openly expresses his disdain for Squirrelflight, we have this lovely bit where Brambleclaw immediately accuses her of lying halfway through The Last Hope. "Who's the third cat?" "Dovewing. We are destined to save the clans from the Dark Forest." "Why didn't you tell me? Was it because I'm not your true father? Did you know? Is that why you lied about them being your kits?" "No!" The scene goes on. Squirrelflight tries to apologize, but Brambleclaw shouts that he wasn't their father. Squirrelflight insists that he was. Lionblaze makes sad noises. He takes it back, but not what he said to Squilf. Leafpool defends Squirrelflight. We never get Brambleclaw's response to this, because the chapter ends, but later on, when the Dark Forest is attacking, everybody's preparing for battle, and this happens. "Will you fight beside me?" "Always." Later, at the very end, after Firestar is dead and Bramblestar is leader, he chooses Squirrelflight as his deputy, even though earlier in the day he was accusing her of further lying. If, before the Super Edition, Bramblestar's Storm, there was a proper resolution to be had between them, if they had gone over their feelings towards the lie, or made up for the way Bramblestar's been treating her for the last 6 books, it's not on page. But this is the point where Brambleclaw, now Bramblestar, stops punishing Squilf for her cover-up. It again takes a crisis, some huge danger that threatens the clans, to make Brambleclaw and Squirrelflight reconnect. But why would Bramble want to? Why does Bramble want to be in a leader-deputy relationship with someone he's been blatantly avoiding for the past year? Especially if all it took to fix that connection was being briefly scolded by Leafpool and Lionblaze. And yeah, we don't actually get resolution on the Kit secret thing until Bramblestar Storm comes out 2 years later, but that still doesn't explain this. Does a huge, dangerous crisis make him reevaluate his actions? Or did it just make him realize that Squirrelflight was something he wanted to keep, after a year of treating her passive-aggressively on purpose? This is a problematic idea, assuming Bramblestar, in his heart of hearts, still wanted to be with her or at least forgive her. He has been angry, passive-aggressive, and neglectful for a full year. It's not the same as his punishing behavior when she's courting Ashfur, but it's still super manipulative and damaging. It takes a lot of effort to keep up the cold shoulder that long. When the other person is submissive and offering no pushback at all, you're exerting extra force to be cold and neglectful in your day-to-day duties. He's being cruel to her because she hurt him, sure. On a surface level, that's what it is. But his behaviors are abusive. Squirrelflight did something wrong. It wasn't abuse. It was pressured on her by outside forces. Brambleclaw did things specifically to punish Squirrelflight. On 2 separate occasions, he has actively punished Squirrelflight. And let's not forget that Brambleclaw is in a position of power over Squirrelflight. He has the ability to control her, not only in their relationship through this manipulation, but also in the kitty workplace hierarchy. And this is the point where you might think to yourself, clearly the authors didn't intend it that way, and we don't know this. Like I said earlier, it's super hard to tell what their intention here was, or even if they were aware of it. But what was written down are behaviors that are used to abuse and control people in real life. And it might seem like it's nothing, like, oh, the cold shoulder isn't so bad, you'd imagine, glaring at someone who wants to make up with you. But he's not just her mate, he's her boss, and it's been going on for a year. Not to mention, the cold shoulder alone is a control tactic. It's not something that's simply used to avoid someone. It makes the other party anxious and desperate, and we can see that in Squirrelflight's uncharacteristically appeasing, submissive behavior. This is Squirrelflight we're talking about. In her natural state of mind, she's headstrong and active and independent. Bramblestar has made her into a scared fawn by comparison. And I know you're probably waiting for Squirrelflight's hope at this point, but I've got a little bit more to go over before I dip my feet into that pool. Bramblestar Storm takes place 6 months after the Great Battle. Bramblestar and Squirrelflight are still not romantically involved. This is a vaguely peaceful book between them, but a lot of it has context that I'm going to be calling back to later. The plot begins with Bramblestar trying to pressure his clanmates to have kittens because he's worried about not having enough of them or something. And then it leads into a story about excessive flooding in the clan territories. Towards the beginning, he thinks of Squirrelflight as the best possible deputy. Additionally, he uses phrases like, "I'd be lost without her as my deputy," to further imply she's capable and intelligent at her job. We have passages like this one where Squirrelflight tries to convince him not to overexert himself. His admission here implies further that he chose her because she has her own ideas and will challenge him, alongside the fact that she's simply good at the job. It's my personal opinion that Bramblestar and Squirrelflight function best like this, no relationship, and it feels like it's proven by their interactions not only within this book, but also in early New Prophecy, before they're together. There are still moments of weirdness. For example, Squirrelflight deciding to talk to Little Cloud about nothing receives an intervention as if she doesn't know the rules. Things take a weird turn after the introduction of a kitty pet named Jessie, a she-cat who is seemingly extremely skilled and extremely intelligent. She's framed as always being correct and incredibly attractive. Her characterization bothers me unreasonably. I'll disregard my personal feelings. Bramblestar brings 2 kitty pets and a blanket into camp. Squirrelflight snaps. They're currently dealing with a flood, and they're having trouble taking care of themselves. This is a pretty long passage, but it's really one of only a couple within the books where Squirrelflight treats Bramblestar unreasonably, so I think it's important to include. I'm well aware of why this scene is in the books. They want to showcase Squirrelflight's level of supportiveness in contrast with Jessie's. Jessie being an all-knowing super cat, it's pretty easy. That? You went all that way and put your clanmates in danger for that? It's disgusting. No, it might not be so bad. We can stretch it over a bush to dry it. Who do you think you are? You should be grateful to Bramblestar. He risked his life to get that. I know how brave Bramblestar is. I'm going to sort out patrols. Bramblestar, you need to rest and eat. Wow, is she always like that? Yeah, pretty much. And while I disagree with Bramblestar's assessment there, this book is from his perspective. And if he sees Squirrelflight as someone who's constantly yelling and overreacting, I guess it kind of makes sense in the context of how he treats her. Later, Squirrelflight is rude again, after Bramblestar has decided to take a romantic stroll with Jessie the kitty pet. These scenes are trying to showcase that she's jealous. Squirrelflight gets over it just about instantly, but gets angry again when Bramblestar suddenly remembers that he literally witnessed WindClan cats invading earlier. Not to be a Squirrelflight apologist or anything, but this is vaguely reasonable. Bramblestar's the leader of the clan, and just forgetting for a good 10 minutes after you got back from frolicking meaninglessly with the kitty pet, it's just kind of dense. Squirrelflight displays mild annoyance at Jessie's inclusion in serious clan matters for a while, but she warms up to her after a bit. Later, we get yet another reaffirmation that Squirrelflight is just fantastic at her job. I'd be lost without Squirrelflight to keep every cat in line. She has a knack for making them all feel useful and important, even Purdy. And when Bramblestar gets hurt fighting a battle for ShadowClan, he anticipates her scolding him, but she reassures him instead. Soon after, she catches him teaching Jessie a crouch and acts jealously, bringing up some badger story. Great StarClan! Is Squirrelflight jealous because I'm training Jessie now? That's ridiculous! This is, completely unrelated, it's a total side note, but they really do rate Squirrelflight as if she's short. Sure, she was looking down at Jessie earlier and needs to look up to look at Bramblestar, but this sentence really gives you the mental image of an itty-bitty kitty. Towards the end of Bramblestar's storm, Squirrelflight finds out that Bramblestar was fighting for Tawnypelt's sake, and we get resolution on the kids' plotline. Why would you risk your own clan to help Tawnypelt and ShadowClan? Because I'd do anything to help my sister. As would you. As he spoke, Bramblestar finally understood why Squirrelflight had lied to him about the kits. He had already forgiven her, because he knew that she had been trying to do the best for every cat, but only now did he appreciate the impulse that made her build so much upon something that wasn't true. That's why you did what you did, isn't it? You took Leafpool's kits because you loved her. Squirrelflight nodded, her eyes so full of feeling that he guessed she couldn't find words to answer. I have nothing but respect for your courage, he told her, looking down into the clearing again. He saw Lionblaze sprawled out contentedly beside his mate, and Jayfeather happily bossing Briarlight around. We raised 3 fine cats, he mewed, remembering Hollyleaf's brave's death and blah blah blah, Hollyleaf is dead. He and Squirrelflight sat in silence, gazing down at their kits and their other clanmates, cheerful in the sunlight below. I'll support you, Bramblestar. If you want to take ThunderClan into battle on ShadowClan's behalf, I will be with you. At this point, Squirrelflight is fully forgiven for the secret she kept. The narrative always wanted us to think Squirrelflight had done the right thing, so this is a conclusion we were always leading to when it comes to Squirrelflight's secret, which honestly just kind of rubs salt in his treatment of her during Omen of the Stars. Take notice that even though Brambleclaw is kind of breaking clan rules to do what is right, Squirrelflight supports him because she understands why he's making that decision. We'll find out soon that this is a courtesy that only goes in one direction. What it took for him to empathize was his own connection with his siblings, which is something that he probably should have already understood, especially after the whole Hawkfrost situation. But at the time, during the new prophecy while that was going on, Brambleclaw belittled Squirrelflight's connection to Leafpool, so, who's to say? Further on, Squirrelflight tells Brambleclaw that she's willing to accept Jessie. He thinks about his adopted kits with Squirrelflight and feels guilt over previously regretting them. Jessie chooses to leave after this, realizing Bramblestar still has lingering feelings for Squirrelflight, and knowing that if she stays, being perfect and special and awesome and also a human-level genius, she would definitely win his affections, and that would be rude of her because Bramblestar has adult sons with Squirrelflight. Honestly, some of what she says here could be taken out of context as some sort of anti-divorce argument. You would have been a great warrior. Oh, I know I would. I'll never forget you. Nor I you. Bramblestar pressed himself closer against Jessie's side, breathing in her scent for one last time. I wish things could have been different, he thought. It's hard to believe I'll never see her again. Looking over Jessie's head, he saw the lake turn scarlet by the setting sun. He remembered his vision of Yellowfang, the blood rising to meet her paws, and realized that blood ran deeper than anything else. Jessie is right. Whatever I have felt for her, whatever might have been, Squirrelflight and I share a bond that cannot be broken. I feel like this is sort of a flimsy justification for staying with someone, but at least it acknowledges Holly, Jay, and Lion as their real children, which is, it's nice. But now Bramblestar and Squirrelflight are back together, and what do you know, she's pregnant. Yeah, the whole Baron thing from earlier, it was a lie to make her take the children. As if this is some sort of Greek tragedy, God has lied to her. The peace in their relationship continues through her childbirth and through the series A Vision of Shadows, a series largely about, or heavily involving, in one way or another, their son, Anxiety Squirrelflight clone. Squirrelflight's presence, specifically in this arc, is more of the deputy than the mother. She spends time casually with Bramblestar, they share mice. If anything is happening between them, we are completely unaware of it. Something I want to mention about Squirrelflight's behavior in A Vision of Shadows specifically is that she's kind of toned down. And this might just be because we're farther removed from her, not hearing about her as often, but she's not quite as obviously independent as she was in previous arcs. It's implied that throughout this arc, she's just doing her job. And seemingly doing it well. Maybe she's just getting older. Either way, that brings us to Squirrelflight's hope. Remember Bramblestar's storm, where Bramble is thinking about how great it is Squirrelflight contests him, and that's why he made her deputy? About how she's the best person for the job? How she's capable and the best possible person for the position? Just, keep that in mind. I should mention before I start this bit in particular that while discussing Squirrelflight's hope, there will probably be some overlap with a video you might have seen by Bright Guardian Akira on this topic. If you feel like some of this commentary seems like deja vu, that might be why. I'll link her video in the description so that you can see that as well. Squirrelflight's hope opens with a conflict. 3 moons after the last series ended, the leaders and deputies are meeting to reevaluate their borders after SkyClan moved in. As they walk to the meeting, Squirrelflight is taking in the moment. They're reminiscing about the month they spent together back in the new prophecy. He mentions that it was nice before they had kits. She says she would like to have them again. Keep in mind, she's not asking here, she's just presenting the idea. Simply mentions that she would like kits. She gets an answer that doesn't really imply one way or another that he agrees. She changes the subject, tries to get him to frolic with her, or something. Because let's pretend we're young and sneaking out of camp just makes me think that they're going to go hopping through flower fields at night like it's Bambi. He rejects this too. He's too busy and this is too serious, and that's fine. But Squirrelflight's feeling dejected now, and there's an implication that they haven't had fun together for a while. Squirrelflight longs for his attention, and she's trying to tell him that. He seems to notice, but he's trying to dismiss it because he's preoccupied with clan matters. The meeting starts. It's a discussion. What do we do with the borders? We've moved for SkyClan, but now everybody else is thrown off and have territories they cannot use, along with having lost the ones that they do in the shuffle. The other leaders want to fix this. Bramblestar doesn't. He doesn't want land to be taken from him or from SkyClan. Squirrelflight presents her own solution. There's territory above ThunderClan and ShadowClan towards the Moonpool. They could have a boot-shaped territory with a narrow strip down to the lake. They all discuss this idea, but after the discussion, Bramblestar is pissed. And Squirrelflight literally doesn't understand why. From her perspective, all she's done is present an alternative concept. He starts yelling at her immediately. She tries to defend her idea and makes the mistake of claiming there will be more kits to feed in New Leaf. He's lashing his tail, he's been growling, he responds, "More kits? Is that all you think about now?" Keep in mind, Squirrelflight hadn't even asked. She simply mentioned them. When this sort of thing happens in an argument, it's because the other person is deflecting. He's going after this point, which in context clearly isn't about Squilf herself actually having kittens at all, and is a good point within the conversation, to not only take a low blow at Squirrelflight, but also to change the topic. This is something that is personal to her, and he's brought it up again after she's already dropped it. Of course, she responds, "Don't you think about it? Don't you think about kits, Bramblestar?" "I have kits." "Alderheart and Sparkpelt, they're grown up now." "I know. They're old enough to look after themselves. Why are you so desperate to be responsible for new lives? Isn't being deputy enough?" "It should be, but it's not. I'm getting older with each season. One day I won't be able to have any more kits. I just want another litter before it's too late." "I know. And of course I want kits, just not as much as you do." Before I go on to what Squirrelflight says next, which is an entire thing on its own, I want to take apart this bit. First of all, after he says more kits, he runs. He runs away while she chases him and tries to continue the conversation. He's accusatory. "Why are you so desperate to be responsible for new lives? Isn't being deputy enough?" She answers him honestly. She's getting older, she feels like she's running out of time, and his actions while talking make it clear that he doesn't want to be talking about this. But here's the part that really holds people up. Squirrelflight asks, "Don't you love me anymore?" And in context, this goes by quickly. The conversation moves on immediately from this point, and it's not heavily lingered on, just like Bramblestar's questions earlier. I've seen this contextualized a couple times on Twitter and Tumblr blogs as being a guilt trip. I want to argue that it's simply a legitimate question. Squirrelflight has been feeling unloved. Squirrelflight has been feeling neglected. The conversation before has made it clear that he hasn't had time for her alone in a long time, and on top of this, he has just used the phrase, "just not as much as you do," to refer to something she wants out of their relationship. This isn't Squirrelflight trying to get her way, or trying to force him to have kits, and that's easily proven a little further on. What Squirrelflight wants out of the question is to learn if she's still loved, and simply that. Meanwhile, Bramblestar had been throwing out accusations earlier in the conversation. To bring it back around to, "Why are you so desperate to be responsible for new lives, and isn't being deputy enough?" These questions are presented because Bramblestar finds what Squirrelflight wants to be unreasonable, not because he's coming from a place of actual concern. Sure, it's easy to point at, "Don't you love me anymore?" and say that's a guilt trip, that's manipulation, if you somehow haven't been reading the rest of this conversation. But if you consider it that way, how could you ever consider the way Bramblestar is acting to be in good faith? Even if we're to paint Squirrelflight saying, "Don't you love me anymore," as some sort of clear wrong, that doesn't erase the fact that she's not the person with any power in this situation. Her husband is the leader. She holds no power over him. She's currently being scolded for having something she wants out of the relationship, a topic she didn't even bring up this time. They were talking about the meeting, and he brought it back around to how trivial her feelings about kittens were to deflect and use the topic to make her seem like she was being unreasonable. The conversation from here turns to age. Bramblestar says he's getting older. Squirrelflight yells that this isn't true because he's got more lives. She fears the gap in their longevity. The book implies here that with multiple lives, he will be living much longer. Squirrelflight worries about being replaced when she dies, which is a very understandable fear. Cats like Graystripe who lost their mates early came to love others eventually. Bramblestar then apologizes for bringing up the kits and admits he did it out of anger because he felt like she wasn't on his side at the meeting. Squirrelflight insists that she was trying to find a solution, and if you look at the conversation again, that's all it seems to be. While Bramble is passionate about not moving territory, Squirrelflight seems to believe she's presenting an idea that will please him as well. She has no way of knowing that she was doing anything wrong, and it seemed to be an open discussion up until that point, not an us versus them situation. Bramblestar insists that her presenting a different opinion than him on the discussion was displaying weakness, and that she should have presented it to him first, which is, okay, maybe, but that certainly wasn't the tone of the conversation. It didn't even seem like she was arguing with anyone, just presenting a hopeful idea. Nothing about what she did made ThunderClan look or feel divided. Squirrelflight starts to argue on this point, but she stops. She asks if the reason Bramblestar dismissed the idea of kittens was because he was mad at her. Bramblestar gazed at her, his eyes round. "I'm sorry if I made it sound that way. I do want to have kittens with you." "Really?" Her heart lifted. "Yes, if that's what you want." Squirrelflight stared at him. There was resignation in his eyes. Grief twisted her belly as he stared back at her blankly. She turned away. I want you to want it too. She could tell that he was saying that to appease her, and throughout the rest of the book, she never presents the idea of having more children to him again. That's it. That's the end. She knows he doesn't want them, despite him literally saying otherwise, and doesn't push it further. It haunts her. She speaks about it with Leafpool, but every time it's brought up past this point, Bramblestar's doing it. If Squirrelflight's end goal was simply kittens, or she felt like she was entitled to kittens, that would have been enough for her. Squirrelflight is saddened and goes and sleeps in the warrior's den, thinking about how she's replaceable and unimportant. The warrior cat's equivalent of going to sleep on the couch. She spends the next day thinking about how terrible she had been to Bramblestar, how she had overreacted. She goes over the argument from the day before over again in her mind. She feels guilty for wanting children. She thinks about how Bramblestar implied she wasn't being a good deputy. And although she says that she has the right to her own opinion, she's only blaming herself. And you might be thinking, hey, that's kind of weird. Bramblestar just spent the night putting her down. Why is she thinking of herself like this and blaming herself so fully for the argument about children? That's easy. Squirrelflight is in an abusive relationship. We've already seen the cycle of abuse at work here, and if you've never heard of it, here's a quick rundown. I'm going to explain this very simply, so if you want a more detailed overview of this, I will put links in the description, as I'm sure learning about abuse from a Warrior Cats YouTuber is not ideal. And you might be thinking here, this is a cat book. You can't apply this sort of rhetoric to their relationships. But there is tons of much more obvious abuse in warrior cats. We see children abused by their parents in cases like Rainflower and Crooked Kit. We see abusive relationships completely intended with cats like Ragged Star and Yellowfang. So here's a simplified version of the cycle of abuse. The first is tension. The abuser is upset by something. Usually the victim can tell and feels anxious and tries not to make the situation worse. The second is abuse. The abuser lashes out, either physically or emotionally, trying to control or punish the victim. And 3 is honeymoon, or a peace phase. The abuser shows regret for the abuse and tries to make things right. This is followed by a period of normalcy where nothing bad is happening. And obviously this is a simplification, and obviously not every abusive relationship follows this pattern. But with Bramblestar and Squirrelflight, we can run this through a few times. Squirrelflight and Brambleclaw disagree about Hawkfrost. This makes him upset. He lashes out by treating her poorly and finding excuses to scold and talk down to her. He makes up with her and treats her well after the badger attack. Brambleclaw learns that Squirrelflight hid the kitten's parentage from him. He punishes her by giving her the silent treatment for an entire year. He makes up with her and treats her well after the Dark Forest attack. I would go through this a third time, but I'm not quite done with Squirrelflight's hope. But I want to talk about one more thing before I dive back into that. Why does Squirrelflight want kittens? This is answered in the book easily enough. She wants to feel needed. She wants to feel like she's contributing, like she's important to someone. Clearly, she doesn't seem important to Bramblestar. She's worried about having no legacy, worried about growing old. In fact, her wanting more children is something that's very heavily outlined in the book. It's well backed up. But let me bring something else up, something that probably wasn't intended by the authors, but a coincidence that sure does bother me. Every time there has been normalcy in their relationship, after a big conflict, they have had a litter of kittens. The duration of their kit's childhood, and for a little while after, Squirrelflight and Bramblestar are happy and normal and loving. After that, each time, they have fallen back into a conflict that leads to Bramblestar's abuse period. It's super easy to read this book as if Squirrelflight is associating motherhood with normalcy and love in her relationship. And that bothers me. Anyways, back to the book. Squirrelflight decides on her own that she wants to check the above territories to see if there'll be suitable living space for SkyClan. She meets with Leafstar to scout the area. She doesn't run this past Bramblestar. Squirrelflight is going behind her leader's back because she believes she is doing the right thing for everyone. She feels guilty about going behind his back, but when caught by her daughter's patrol, she tells her not to let Bramblestar know. They find suitable territory, proving Squirrelflight's theory right, but they also find a group of huge, nomadic necromancer she-cats who are currently waiting to give birth there. Unfortunately, Moonlight and the sisters decide to hold them hostage. As Squirrelflight is kept, she begins to get serious anxiety about her actions. She's worried about Bramblestar's anger and feeling guilty about both the harm the warriors will do to the sisters and the trouble she must be putting people through to look for her. 2 days later, when they come to rescue her, she stops them from attacking. They fight again on the way home. It ends with Bramblestar giving her a huge restriction. "You can rely on me." The ground seemed to shift beneath Squirrelflight's paws. Didn't he trust her anymore? Not when you behave like a reckless apprentice, Bramblestar glared at her. From now on, I want you to run every decision by me. No more going off on your own ridiculous missions. No more arguing with me at gatherings. If a deputy can't support her own leader, perhaps she's not fit to be deputy. With that, Bramblestar pulled ahead, his shoulders stiff, and followed his clanmates on a path wound into the wooded ravine. Some of the ThunderClan warriors shot Squirrelflight sympathetic glances. It only made her feel more wretched. Did my own mate just threaten to replace me as deputy? She trailed behind. Bramblestar is again punishing Squirrelflight and treating her like a child, something that he has been doing since the beginning of their relationship. Squirrelflight has endangered herself and Leafstar by going off on their own, but she did it truly believing that it was the solution to their problem, and that Bramblestar wouldn't have allowed it. She acted on her instincts behind the back of an unreasonable leader, and she was correct to do so. At this point in the book, it's easy to forget that the alternatives were both terrible. Either the clans continue on poorly shuffled territories where they cannot hunt and would likely starve on, or they would take back their original suitable territories, driving out SkyClan again. Bramblestar's insistence that keeping the territories as they are is best for protecting themselves in SkyClan is bogus. There's literally no question that the other cats wouldn't have been happy with that arrangement. Regardless of if or not the new territories were devised by Tigerstar II, he wouldn't hesitate to use force to take them back, and he says as much later in the book. And with the other clan leaders likely agreeing with him, it's a recipe for disaster. It honestly feels like, reading this book, that Bramblestar is more concerned with the concept of being the one in the wrong than with actually helping anyone. He tells Squirrelflight, the deputy that he praised in the past for her independence, who he respected and appreciated for being good at her job, that from now on she needs to be completely obedient or she's unsuitable for the position. He's restricting her. He's taking as complete a control over her as he can. The chapter ends with the sentence, she could sense that Bramblestar wasn't going to forgive her anytime soon. But if this was just about not wandering off and not arguing at gatherings, it would be one thing. Bramblestar is now making her run every element of her job past him. He's making her run the next day's dawn patrol structure by him arbitrarily, making a point to insult the way she does it. She notices that he's being unreasonable and says, "Is that how it's going to be now? Are you going to make up mouse-brained rules just to prove you're in charge? You're my deputy. I need to know that you can follow orders. Or you'll replace me. I know, I get the message. I need to know I can trust you." Of course you can trust me. I love you and I love my clan. I would never do anything to hurt you or them. This little trust exercise that Bramblestar is performing is an excuse. He's angry, he's taking out that anger, and he's done this to her multiple times before. It's followed by this thought. Bramblestar is supposed to be her mate. Why couldn't he talk to her instead of making her feel small? Good question, Squirrelflight. Sparkpelt stops by to announce that she's pregnant. Bramblestar takes a break from controlling and scolding Squirrelflight to make her aware that he can tell that she's not entirely happy with the announcement as a cat who wanted to have more kits. She snaps back with, "And I know you don't," and takes off, immediately feeling guilty about being rude to the man who's been treating her like fox dung. She expresses her guilt to Leafpool. She feels like she doesn't deserve to want something. She feels like she'll never be happy again. I don't know how to express properly how horrible and familiar these ideas are. Squirrelflight thinks like an abuse victim. She acts like an abuse victim just as much as Bramblestar acts like an abuser. Just reading Leafpool and Squirrelflight talking about it, I feel myself desperately wishing the cats in this book could understand or recognize these behaviors. Like, listen to this snippet of conversation. Bramblestar says he's wondering whether he should replace me as deputy. And he's making up rules to test me. He doesn't trust my judgment anymore. He just needs to calm down. He was really worried when you went missing. He thought you might be dead. Everything I do seems wrong at the moment. He tried to be kind to me just now when Sparkpelt told us her news and I snarled at him. There's an understanding here from Leafpool that Bramblestar is acting unreasonable. There's a taste of the fact that he's acting this way because he isn't calm, but she justifies it. She treats his punishing, threatening behavior as normal, but I guess why wouldn't she? He's the clan leader. Leafpool can't do anything about this. Nobody can. Bramblestar is in such a position that Squirrelflight can never truly escape this without leaving her entire life behind. But Leafpool comforts her, and that's probably the best she can do either way. Squirrelflight and Bramblestar keep up appearances so that the clan doesn't know that they're on bad terms. They sleep in separate little I Love Lucy nests. In the following chapter, Squirrelflight's patrol finds one of the sisters wounded after a fight. Squirrelflight knows that she will die without medical help and chooses to bring her back to camp. Everyone around her knows Bramblestar isn't going to be happy about this. They anticipate his anger. Squirrelflight, as before, knows she's doing the right thing and brings Sunrise back to camp anyways. And of course, he isn't happy about it. He contests Squirrelflight every step of the way and feels no empathy for Sunrise. He refused Sunrise medical attention on the idea that Tigerstar would be upset by it, the same Tigerstar, by the way, that he was already distrusting and on bad terms with at the beginning of the book. Not to mention, Bramblestar, and ThunderClan as a whole, has a track record up until this point of taking in cats who need help. His sudden refusal in this situation has everything to do with his reignited anger towards Squirrelflight now that she's disobeyed his authority again. Squirrelflight herself notices that this is out of character, thinking, when did Bramblestar become so heartless? Did he really believe that clan unity was worth paying for in another cat's blood? Bramblestar sends Jayfeather and Alderheart to the Moonpool to get StarClan's approval to treat Sunrise. Meanwhile, the she-cat's wound is becoming infected in camp. When the two medicine cats come back with an unclear answer, Bramblestar yells at them and reinterprets the message to suit his needs. When Squirrelflight insists on helping the cat anyways, we get a true guilt trip. Remember the earlier one, Squirrelflight's "Don't you love me anymore" line? It's emotional. It comes after Bramblestar has just brought up something personal to her to discount her opinions. It's a response, directly, to him trying to trivialize her opinions and emotions. This next bit is different. Squirrelflight is insisting it's morally correct to save a dying cat's life. Bramblestar is saying we should let this person die so that tension doesn't escalate between them and ShadowClan. Leafpool insists on treating her. Bramblestar stops her, physically intimidating her to prevent her from leaving. Squirrelflight pushes herself in between her mate and her sister, legitimately believing that he is willing to fight her, and Bramblestar says this: "We can't keep doing this. If you keep undermining my authority, you could destroy the whole clan. I have to do what I think is right. Even if it costs you your clan? ThunderClan is stronger than that. At least I hope it is. If our future depends on letting a cat die, then it's not the clan I thought it was." "Why are you doing this to me? You're my deputy. You're my mate. You're supposed to support me." Being a good deputy doesn't mean blindly following orders. It means standing up for what I believe, and this time I believe I'm right. Bramblestar has been misusing his authority to punish Squirrelflight unfairly. This scene where he tries to micromanage patrols is proof of that. When she continues to push for what she believes in, he takes to a different tactic. Squirrelflight wasn't trying to make Bramblestar guilty or get his sympathy by asking if he loved her. But this is blatantly him trying that angle. It's his last attempt at control. It doesn't work this time and he gives in. But he gives her a threat afterwards. "StarClan wanted unity among the clans," he snarled. "Thanks to you, there's not even unity in ThunderClan anymore." He's failed to dominate her, and he wants her to feel as bad as possible. This is a proper guilt trip. Bramblestar is trying to make her feel bad about something she's done. I am trying so hard not to go over every little thing that happens in this book, but it's hard. Bramblestar and Squirrelflight seem to make up a little in Chapter 12. Squirrelflight anticipates him being angry, but he's had a sudden change in temperament and apologizes. The happiness this causes Squilf doesn't last very long, though, as Bramblestar very quickly implies he's willing to put the sisters in danger for what was previously Squirrelflight's plan. In Chapter 14, when Sparkpelt, Bramble and Squirrelflight's pregnant daughter, is having anxiety about her mate being sick and ShadowClan possibly poisoning them, she blames Bramblestar. Squirrelflight stands up for Bramblestar here. Sparkpelt adds this: "Why are you sticking up for him? He's hardly spoken to you in days. He's been treating you like an apprentice, and you're defending him. Why are you being such a mouseheart?" Mouseheart means coward, by the way. I'm just gonna translate that for you. With my, crazy Warrior Cats knowledge I've been recording for an hour. While Sparkpelt is a bit sick at the time, this at the very least indicates that others are aware that Squirrelflight's relationship with Brambleclaw is unhealthy. Additionally, the treating you like an apprentice line specifically is something that's come up before. Deputy or not, agreeable or not, Bramblestar doesn't see Squirrelflight as if she's on the same level as he is. When he's upset with her, he treats her as if he would a child, assigning her jobs usually for the clan's children, talking down to her, giving her the kind of restrictions and punishments a parent gives a child who's been caught acting out. In Chapter 19, when talking about Sparkpelt's new kits, Leafpool asks Squirrelflight why she hasn't properly made up with Bramblestar. We get this exchange.
Have you talked to Bramblestar yet?
It's not easy.
Why not? He's your mate.
What if I ask him about kits and he still doesn't want them as much as I do? Or I ask him about the sisters and he says they have to leave. I know he's still angry that I went off and found them in the first place. I'm sure he thinks that it's my fault that the clans are fighting.
The clans are always fighting.
I guess, but this time Bramblestar blames me.
Are you sure?
I'm not sure of anything right now.
Why don't you ask him?
It might make things worse.
Will they get better if you keep quiet?
Maybe. Squirrelflight is afraid of Bramblestar's anger. She believes that communication might make things worse between them, even though she desperately wants to discuss these topics. In a healthy relationship, she wouldn't be having these kinds of hang-ups. In Chapter 21, they come to a confrontation. Bramblestar wants to send a patrol to scare the sisters off of their territory. Squirrelflight doesn't. Squirrelflight resigns herself, unable to stop this. He asks her if he can depend on her tomorrow when they go to evict them. She refuses, saying she can't support this, and she doesn't. She thinks that it's wrong to try and force them to move for their own gain, especially when one of them is kidding. She doesn't have blind faith in a morally wrong decision.
You're my deputy. I expect you to support me no matter what. How can my clan trust my decisions when you constantly challenge me?
You're their leader. They'll support you no matter how wrong you are.
So you doubt your clan, too?
That's not what I said. It's what you meant. You haven't understood what I meant for a moon. If you did, we wouldn't be arguing now, and you wouldn't be leading a battle patrol against an expectant queen.
Is that all that matters to you? Some rogue and her kits? There's more to life than kits.
And there's more to life than fighting.
Of course there is. Do you think I don't know that?
You're acting as if borders and battles are the only thing you care about.
And you're acting like the sisters are the only cats you care about.
Bramblestar brings up kittens again here, just like he does in the first chapter, to trivialize her argument. No matter what Squirrelflight says as this goes forward, Bramblestar isn't budging. Bramblestar has no justifications for why they can't wait until the sisters leave. He justifies it by saying he's performing the will of StarClan, but we know this is untrue. StarClan's message was vague and kinda hinted the opposite. Then Squirrelflight begins feeling sorry for Bramblestar. She tells him that she loves him. He tells her that he loves her as well. She's accompanying the patrol to chase out the sisters, even though she knows it to be wrong, because she suddenly believes displaying her loyalty to her abuser is more important than doing what she thinks is right. Soon after, she's pulled into a nightmare about kits dying in battle. She recognizes this as a prophetic warning, as many dreams and warrior cats are, and goes to check if Sparkpelt's children are okay. Discussing this with Leafpool makes them realize that it was Moonlight's kits who were endangered, and they take off ahead of the patrol anyway. Obviously, when Bramblestar catches them there, he is unhappy. They're going to attack. Then they're not. Then Squirrelflight dies in a landslide. As a scary ghost, Squirrelflight overhears Bramblestar regretting the terrible way he's treated her all book, now that she's dead. Much like in the new prophecy and Omen of the Stars, it takes a terrible crisis for him to realize he needs to stop treating her badly. Squirrelflight comes back to life, for Bramblestar and for her daughter Sparkpelt, who still needs her. Paw steps sounded outside, and Bramblestar crashed through the brambles at the entrance.
She's awake?
Fear glittered in his gaze.
Is she okay?
She will be. Alderheart moved aside, and Squirrelflight met Bramblestar's gaze. Her heart leaped as his face softened. He suddenly looked like the young warrior she'd fallen in love with. As he rushed towards her, she stretched out her muzzle, breathing in the warmth and the scent of him as he pressed his cheek against hers. He began to lick her head, as urgent and gentle as a mother lapping her kit. She purred. "I'm sorry I scared you."
"Don't be sorry." He pulled away and looked into her eyes. "Don't be sorry for anything. I was so worried. I love you so much. We should never have let things get so bad. I'll never let it happen again."
Just a quick note about this, even here, Bramblestar's language is manipulative. Even though he tells her not to apologize, he doesn't take the blame for the situation and implies both of them are at fault. They make up completely this time. He acts extra loving and extra caring. He stands up for her at the gathering. The idea of having more children has passed with his newfound affection, and she now feels that her motherly instincts, or whatever it was she wanted out of children, can be fulfilled by her daughter's litter and others. Squirrelflight sat down to rest her leg. Why had she wanted kits of her own so much? There would always be kits in the clan. It didn't matter if they weren't hers. A clan was like kin, and their kits would be her kits too. The sisters weren't the only cats to believe a kit belonged to every cat. Had she forgotten that warriors had been helping to raise each other's kits for moons? She purred to herself. That would never change. Bramblestar doesn't bring up kits either, probably because he doesn't want them. This book, Bramblestar's actions are more blatant and obvious than any time beforehand. This also follows the previously discussed cycle of abuse. Bramblestar gets angry, he abuses Squirrelflight, and then when things reach a breaking point, in this case the danger of her death, he makes everything nice and happy and wonderful again. And sure, maybe a person dying isn't the same as a person leaving another, but the behavior mirrors abuse nearly exactly. Squirrelflight may be a little wild in this book, going off on her own, trying to fix problems behind his back, but everything she's doing is the correct action to take. Meanwhile, his anger and stubbornness clouds his judgment and causes him to take the wrong path repeatedly, which just makes it so Squirrelflight needs to do more rule-breaking to make up for it. He even purposefully sets her up to fail, making up rules about patrols just to find something wrong with the way she does things. He wants excuses to put her down. The difference between Brambleclaw and the New Prophecy, belittling and yelling at Squirrelflight because he's upset with her about Hawkfrost, and Bramblestar here is nothing more than the level of power he has over her. And I'm not saying they planned this or had any grand scheme in mind to acknowledge Brambleclaw's earlier abusive behaviors, but that because Bramblestar is written vaguely consistently in his interactions with Squirrelflight between these stories, he's also consistently abusive towards her. Squirrelflight is absolutely the victim in her relationship, and always has been. No matter how spunky, no matter how horrible you can read into her actions, you can't deny that she is not on the same level as Brambleclaw, not even close. This isn't a both bad for each other situation. This video has gone on so long that you've probably forgotten that that was what I was originally addressing. Squirrelflight's sins are a puddle of water compared to a lake. In every book where she's opposing him, she is on the right side. She is doing the right thing. Much like Fireheart in the original series, Squirrelflight is willing to break the rules of the clan for the benefit of what's good and right. She was right about Hawkfrost. She was right to take her sister's kits. Well, kind of. It was something that was later acknowledged not just by Brambleclaw, but by everyone. She was right to try and solve SkyClan's territory issue. She was right to try and protect the sisters. To make it seem like she has done something wrong by doing these things, you're not just talking about fan perception, but also twisting the very narrative of the text, which presents Squirrelflight as the correct party in every one of these situations. The only time where she's really truly been in the wrong was when she was acting jealous in Bramblestar's storm, something that wasn't particularly manipulative or serious, that she got over on her own and rather quickly. Throughout Squirrelflight's hope, Squirrelflight acts like she doesn't feel like she deserves happiness. She acts like she doesn't feel like she deserves kits. She has no thoughts about lording her wants and needs over Bramblestar, not once. Every thought she has is being passed through a filter of guilt and shame for asking for something in her relationship. And when it comes to Bramblestar, you're not fixing his character simply by selectively ignoring Squirrelflight's hope. On one hand, Squirrelflight's Hope isn't an out-of-character book for him, and on the other, his actions in other arcs are almost identical, with just less power and control over his mate. And keep in mind that abuse isn't always malicious. People with a poor understanding of abuse will argue that Squirrelflight, being disobedient or argumentative, is on the same level as Bramblestar's punishments, but I don't know what to say beyond the fact that this is simply wrong. The way he treats her continually is manipulative, controlling, and blatantly wrong. Additionally, most abusers don't know or realize that their behavior is wrong. They largely think that they are completely right to treat the subject of their abuse the way they do, and Bramblestar always does, right up until the point where he's about to possibly lose Squirrelflight through some terrible force. And what drives me up a tree is that people want to call Squirrelflight things like entitled to justify her treatment, sometimes based on the fact that she tagged along during the journey as a child, and sure, maybe she was entitled, as Squirrelpaw, the child. But this is the cat who took her sister's children even though she desperately didn't want to. Lied to everyone even though she desperately didn't want to. Took months of punishment from her ex-mate and shame for doing those things when she was barely at fault for it. Sat down and accepted Jessie might come to the clan and become Bramblestar's new mate. And literally did the right thing when nobody else would, even though it would be a million times easier to just shut up and do whatever Bramblestar says. This character is far from entitled as you physically can be. When people use this word recently, though, they're talking as if Squirrelflight felt entitled to children. But this is more than proven wrong. She asks once, one single time, after he brings it up unnecessarily. It's on her mind constantly, but she's afraid of being yelled at, afraid of being rejected, and never even touches the subject with her mate for the rest of her goddamn life with him. And we're supposed to play pretend that she was entitled to them? Some people even go as far as to compare her to Finleap, which shows a level of reading comprehension that I think is in a negative score. What's wrong with Finleap isn't that he wanted children, it's that he didn't take no for an answer. He threatened and squirmed his way into trying to make Twigbranch into a mother. Squirrelflight gets an answer that is basically, okay, we'll have kids, and rejects that because he doesn't want them as much as she does. She feels like their relationship is unbalanced, and it is. But even if Squirrelflight was entitled and bratty and annoying and disobedient, she's still being abused. And to say she deserves it, or is just as bad for any of these factors, is completely off the train tracks. They're not on even terms at all. Even when Squirrelflight does things wrong, she's doing them out of honesty, saying, "Don't you love me anymore?" after Brambleclaw has literally brought her personal feelings into their business discussion. Adding her own thoughts during a meeting where ideas are literally being thrown around isn't undermining her leader, and nobody but Bramblestar saw it that way. But Bramblestar does things out of anger, and the books outright confirm this. The characters claim he will be more reasonable when he calms down. He stops being a jerk when things start going his way. Squirrelflight thinks about how he is or will be angry all the time. Even if you like Bramblestar, even if you hate Squirrelflight, you don't need to deny this is happening. And that's the weirdest thing about this, the denial that this resembles almost perfectly a real-life abusive relationship. Even if it's not what the authors intended at all, and I'm sure it's not what the authors intended at all, what's on the page is literally domestic abuse. And I'm not asking for anything here, because largely Squirrelflight is in the right, and right now, Bramblestar is kind of half dead. But what's done is done. Half of the plotlines I've talked about here are a decade old. Who knows where they're going with Bramblestar and Squirrelflight's characters from here on out? I hope they don't get back together. Well, I hope Bramblestar stays dead, and then they don't get back together. But, who knows? I don't think Ashfur is a better alternative. I don't think anybody feels that way. I guess on some level I want justice for my little red cat, but it's already much too late for any justice for Squirrelflight.